Okay, this week I am very excited to introduce my guest. His name is Dave Fulton. Probably half of you, the listeners, are already jumping up and down. Those of you who aren't need to be jumping up and down. He's a phenomenal artist. He's somebody who has kind of like occupied the same galaxies as I have over the years, even though we've never really spent time with each other. But he's most widely known as one of the people behind the band Dweller at the Threshold. He's also done solo work. Recently, he's been, and not even so recently, but over the last few years, he's been doing collaborations. He did some work with one of my favorite guys out there, Giles Reeves. And he is also one of the people that is really identified with American analog synth stuff. So now, if that isn't just the smeariest and weirdest introduction ever, I don't care, because I'm just really excited to have Dave on the podcast. Dave, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you taking time to chat with me. I know you're incredibly busy and got your fingers in 20 pies at any given time. So thanks for taking the time.
Oh, you're welcome. This is great.
So I kind of gave the introduction in a pretty smeary way. And some of it is because I think a lot of the people that listen to my podcast are going to already know who you are. But for those who don't, why don't you give them a quick overview of how you think of yourself? How do you self-identify?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, first of all, I'm male. I typically wear pants, but I don't know how do I self-identify? At least musically, I've always kind of walked the line between the creative side and the engineering side. I think in theory, I have more in common with some of the how shall I say? Well, some of the keyboardists or music that you've heard created by engineers rather than by virtuosos. And I mean, if you want virtuosos, you know where to go. You can always find your Rick Wakeman. You can always find your Ian Bodies, and it just goes right on. So you know who I'm talking about when I say people that can really play. That's something that hasn't necessarily come easy to me. I have to spend long hours woodshedding. But I think it's because a lot of my attention is diverted away from, hey, that's a pretty light. I think I want to go find out why it's blinking like that. And so my attention span moves away from the purely creative side to the engineering or under the hood side of music creation.
Right. Yes, that's a great way to put it. But I would say that what makes you an interesting artist is that you are one of those people. I think of you as a person who makes great choices, right? When I listen to your music, I hear great choices being made, and what that a lot of times means is that you really understand inside your head what you want something to sound like before it necessarily gets squirted out, right?
Well, that's funny. I've also heard myself described that way by other people, or in similar ways. I tend to be very, very good with a razor blade, and I get a lot of pleasure out of listening to tons and tons of, let's say, non-completed or incompleted or music with no home. Right. And finding ways of knitting it together, either by intention or just after letting the material set with me. One of the things that Dweller certainly had going for it was we had a couple of strong people in that band. Paul Ellis being, I'd say, compositionally, pretty darn good. Right. And then you had me that would sit there and wade through the chaff, let's say, and kind of take all of it and condense it down into what was really meaningful, and as well as I had my own contributions, either by the actual editorial decisions and editing and such, and or by traditional, hey, this is my song.
Right, right. Part of my podcast is I like to talk to people about the whatever elements they went through in order to get to be the artists that they are. And in your case, because you have sort of like this affinity to the engineer's life, but also are doing very creative work, both. And while I appreciate you talking about your collaborators, I also, though, your solo work is phenomenal. And so there's clearly a creative side to what you do and how you think as well. And I'm just curious, what was your background that made you into the artist that you are?
Well, my father, as well as being a number of different things, was a policeman, for instance. Not the nicest guy in the world at times. Was a keyboardist and a bass player. And so there was a lot of, hey, if you're going to play with my instruments, you're going to learn how to play them right. And, sit down, play, bam, rap over the knuckles, do it again. And I lost interest in keyboards fairly quickly, and synthesizers. He didn't have a whole lot of those, but because this is like I'm going to say 77 or 78, okay. And he was your traditional Hammond B3 guy, various American, and Italian keyboards of various vintages, but no real synthesizers. So I would start taking his devices while he was at work and plug them in, as he put it, incorrectly.
Right.
And just so I could just get these beautiful, intense, noisy, rocky, guitar-y kind of things coming out of these polite-sounding Vox Continentals and stuff like that. So it started there, and then because of that rejection, I bought a guitar. So I bought a guitar to punish my dad. And I realized very quickly that was not my instrument, and went back to keyboards, but was out of his vision at that point. And at the same time, believe it or not, home computers started to happen, Apple IIs. And such, where, hey, I can put in a parallel interface card. Even before MIDI, you could buy a MIDI card. You could, take the Paya, modular that you just built, and control it, make it do things, by writing a piece of software that would, script something out. And usually it was, pretty academic stuff, but it certainly provided the fodder that for my electronic music, and widening of my ears to kind of get into some of the more bizarre aspects of electronic music. And it wasn't until I actually met John Duvall many years later, who he has a true mastery of the abstract, and that I realized I found somebody else that kind of always, he did what I wanted to do way back then, and he could do it really well. But I ended up, from that point, started playing music by myself, and making tapes and doing other things like that, like everybody else was doing in the mid to late 80s and such, and even the early 80s, and then something rang true, that my father said. He goes, someday, Dave, you're going to want to learn the vocabulary of music so you can play with other people.
Right.
And that was interesting. When I moved to Portland, it's not that I hadn't played with anybody else prior to moving to Portland in '89. Um, the world opened up. There was all these people in Portland wanting to play strange electronic music, and you were all on the same wavelength. And through Dumpster, which was a loose collective of musicians that performed quite regularly for a while in the late '80s and early '90s. Came out of the Dweller at the Threshold came out of that group of people, and then of course meeting Mike Griffin and just getting into the ambient world on that side helped a lot. So that's kind of led me to the point where I am at now, where I play also in a four-piece krautrock band. So, and now I can actually play, which is interesting because now I can go on a stage and for the first time ever feel like I can just jam with people.
Right.
That vocabulary was effectively learned, at least in a rock context.
Well, I didn't know you were playing in a krautrock band. Given my background, I'm gonna have to come and sit in with you guys next time I'm in Portland. So when you talk about like being in the '80s and kind of doing what other people were doing, were you involved in the cassette tape exchange world very much?
Only at the very, very end of it. And that was when I moved to Portland because Dumpster was producing cassettes, like every single week we'd get together and produce two either horribly inspired or horribly bad, jams. And the folks that were in charge of that kind of archiving would trade tapes with people. Sure. And I actually found a couple of those cassettes that were actually out on the trading circuit for a while, and I haven't had the I haven't had the time yet, but I will. I just want to hear how they sound. What is it? Almost 28 years later, 27 years later. Just to see. What are they? What they sound like? What the heck were we thinking? I mean, at that particular time, the various members of Dumpster were listening to everything from Skinny Puppy to Front 242 to Klaus Schulze, Tangerine Dream. So there's all these influences, and we all had the worst possible beat up samplers we could get.
Right.
So as long as and whatever analog synth was cast off at that particular point, I think people that are younger that might be listening to us don't remember a period of time when people were throwing away their
throwing away the analogs,
the analog polyphonics and monophonic synths, and you could get them for virtually nothing.
Yeah, the number of times I saw, like one of my favorite old polysynths was the sadly, what I consider still underrated Korg Poly 6. I remember times when you could go to a music store and they would have 4 of them stacked up, trying to sell them for $50 a piece because someone just, people come in and trade them for DX7s and never wanted to see those things again, right?
Wow, the $50 Poly 6, they've certainly come back around.
Yeah, they have. They have.
I have a Poly 6 that's in pieces right now. I've torn it apart to rake the filter chips and put into some modules for my modular synthesizer, but I've also snagged the ensemble board.
Right. Yeah, that's a beautiful sounding thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it is. And I plan, before I die, to actually rack mount it and put some I/O on it so I can use it with my modular.
Right. Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about your modular in a second, but before we get there, Portland, Dumpster, strange music, how does this not sound? I mean, you said that you moved there in '89?
Yeah, it was '89, yeah.
And so it already had a world of strange music people. And I'll tell you, I was there a couple of months ago for a performance and a little workshop. And I think all those same people just came up and just would randomly start talking to me. It seems like there's something about Portland that is not only accepting, but sort of like a generative influence of the weird. What's up with that?
Well, I'm certainly glad they accept me because yeah, you're kind of you're right about that. But I would go so far to say that just about any major metropolitan area has that kind of going on in it a little bit. I mean, Philadelphia would be a great one to cite as an example. Seattle's another, but I think Portland has a little. It seems a little more DIY here. And I think that you were here for, speaking of DIY, you were here for Romeo's performance.
Oh, dude, and it's something because
Yeah.
I had followed him on Analog Heaven for years and years and years. I had never seen him perform, and I had never seen his system. And oh my God, what a revelation! It was wonderful.
It's a beautiful looking instrument.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, there was myself and another guy there named Brian McGill who were, and actually I think there was a third guy there, Jay Schwitzenberg. They were all we were all dumpster alumni.
I see.
We're all very much older than we were back then.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Murmur.
Yeah.
But that's I have just been fascinated by Portland, and I would like, I need to maybe do a little more research into what makes that place so special, because Portlandia jokes notwithstanding, it does seem to generate sort of an attitude that's I've not seen anywhere else. And
Well, the other thing that I want to point out that should be made clear about the music scene here that I've not seen anywhere else, and this is something that I've definitely taken to heart. There is an acceptance of I'm going to say you can be 60 and be in a band with 17-year-old, and there's a respect and a for both, on both directions, for age and styles of music. And hey, let's take this and put it in a blender, and it doesn't matter where you're coming from. It could be R&B. I happen to know a couple of guys that came out of the prog world that were on labels like Cuneiform and stuff like that. They are now doing straight ahead R&B with like people that are decades older than them and decades younger. Wow. And it just there seems to be an acceptance of just everything. So age, style, it all gets mixed up. Sex, sexuality. It's all just kind of, hey, that seems like it might be interesting. Let's bring you in. It's an amazing time. I hope it never gets like the '90s version of Seattle, where we end up with like. The mega trend. I don't think we ever will. I think Portlandia effectively killed Portland's longevity for cool, which is fine. I want everybody to go away.
Right.
So I guess it's strange when I see the clubs that I used to frequent close up, and hey, I played 8 shows there, and now it's gone, and I think we're seeing the ugly side of gentrification, and it's affecting the music scene a bit. But I think the heart, the acceptance, like I was talking about, the mixture of styles, just the big ears that people have here, is still quite wonderful. I mean, we still suffer from the same things that every other city suffers from, and that's just bad music. Right. But I think we have a vast majority, a very accepting audience, and people with just big ears, both musicians and Johnny Punter alike.
Right. Well, it's funny because it seemed like in almost any circumstance I was in, first of all, people are very talkative there. I found myself getting into conversations. I come from Wisconsin, where everybody puts their head down and gets to where they're going, right? But I found everybody was very talkative, and one of the things that I found was that the concept of being a music maker is completely normalized there, meaning that virtually every taxi driver or hotel doorman or waiter at a restaurant or whatever, they'd be like, "Oh, why are you in town?" And I'd tell them, and they'd be like, "Oh, well, I'm in a band and I do this, and my spouse is in another three bands, and they're doing this, and I used to work at CD Baby, but then those fuckers ... It was just like there's this whole like everybody identifies themselves as having a very musical life, and I think that whether they do great music or not is almost irrelevant. That what that does is, as a sort of like localized society, it makes the acceptance of music be something that's pretty unique.
Yeah, the arts are very important. Hence our Portland arts tax that we're assessed and have to pay. They just bill us like it's like our water bill. You get another bill for arts. Yeah, and mostly it's to support the music in the schools, which is still woefully underfunded. The interesting thing is too. The other thing that I'm doing, not to speed up on your interview or anything, is I put on a radio station here. Done the engineering for it. X-Ray FM is kind of a microcosm of the Portland music scene, both DJ and musician alike. It's done quite well, and we're continuing to do well. The idea is to kind of do what a WFMU or KEXP has done in Seattle. FMU, of course, New York, but
Right.
It kind of reflects that general acceptance of music that everybody has here, and it's true. Everybody's in a band here, so it is quite possible. Like the band I'm in now, I'm playing with a guy who's just now, I think he's just hit 30, 31.
Mm-hmm.
But I've known his father. I played with his father in a band, and he. At some point, we decided to do his krautrock project, and it just doesn't end. But again, I've been playing with that kid I've known him since he was 12. Probably played with him a few years later than that, like when he was in his early teens. But it's that mashup. It's a story that's told over and over and over again here.
Yeah, that's really cool, and I think that maybe while Portlandia might have squeezed some of the cool factor out of Portland, maybe that's just going to keep the hipster web developers away. But it seems like that kind of attitude towards music.
You're talking about my drummer now.
Oh, sorry, drummer.
Web developer and drummer.
Right, there you go. But I think that's the kind of thing that doesn't go away. And it's interesting you talk about the radio station, because that's something that concept of like a local radio station that really has a personality, that kind of went away for a while. With a few exceptions, those you named being the particulars. Although my friend Gregory Taylor up in Madison does a thing at WORT FM. And that's very similar. It's a community-supported radio station that has just never lost its complete grassroots kind of thing. And, in their case, what it means is that, he does a show about weird experimentalism, but it's preceded by a show of gospel music, and
Yep.
you get these like really crazy cross currents and stuff, but it's cool and it's personality rich,
Yeah, and that's I have a show on that I do on prog rock, but the other thing that we're trying to do, and that is to keep things vibrant and not get into a situation like other non-coms, and that would be where a democracy, you die by death by democracy.
Oh, yeah.
And you end up with shows that have been grandfathered in just simply because you were there the longest, even though your show may or may not be relevant or relevant enough to stay on the air. We're trying to figure out the appropriate, hey, how do we stay relevant? Do sunset shows at this time and then bring them back in another. And so you
Right.
constantly get a window of what is happening in Portland as far as the music scene happening without being stuck in the Grateful Dead past. I'm sorry to digress like this.
No, it's interesting. I mean, it's a podcast. It's not like an encyclopedia entry, so we get to talk about whatever we want. And I just happen to find that interesting. You said that one of the things your dad told you that you came to understand and respect was this idea of learning the vocabulary of music so that you can play with others. What does that mean to you, and what was the process that you went through to get that?
Well, it was a long, arduous, tear-filled journey because I take this stuff seriously, and I can't necessarily say I bawled like a baby, but there were nights I was really just not happy with my performance when I first started to try playing with other people, I'm sure everybody still. I mean, I still go through that. Kicking my head, kicking myself. Hitting my head. Hey, that was not a great show. Or anyway, what really happened? The true moment of destiny for me happened when my friend John Duvall invited me to play with a bunch of his old friends who happened to be in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
So, within a mile of my house. So, on a night a week, we would get together and I would play with the old pros.
Right.
And I was not an old pro. They were playing pretty much blues and jazz-based rock. And I got there and they put me in front of a Hammond B3. And which was familiar to me on a number of levels, and I had it's not like I didn't know how to operate the device. I knew how to play it, but to play it in the context of what they were used to. I also brought a synth and sat it down, but for a bit of warmth and familiarity. But the reality is I got my ass kicked and handed to me night after night, week after week after week. After the first time I played with them, they stepped outside for a moment, and John, I think, was out there with them. And I was straightening out some stuff. I felt my performance was somewhat less than stellar, and I knew it, so I figured, hey, what's the thing I know best? Well, let's get everything organized electronically better. Let's make sure my cabling is right, get everything adjusted, my levels right. And then I stepped outside, and as I was making my way around the door, I overheard their conversation, and it was not flattering.
Right.
What I finally heard was, "We'll get him into shape."
Oh wow.
So these old guys took an interest. Obviously, John did too, and that's when it came down to, I guess you got to know your scales. You got to, figure out where people are. You got to understand more about the music theory. If you're not a natural, then the only thing you can do is practice. And musically, I had it all up in my head. To get it out to your fingers was the difficult part. So at that point there, I started taking mandolin lessons and started playing piano,
Right.
strictly piano, and just doing 45 minutes of scales a day. And then when I was thrown into situations where I was jamming with mostly blues-based rock bands, it was like, oh my God, I'm there.
Right.
I can do this. And you can go up. You all start that vocabulary. This is what my dad was talking about. So
So how long do you feel it? How long did it take from the time you decided I need to get serious until you felt like, all right, I can exist in this world?
well, that's funny because we've released two Dweller albums, and I had just finished my solo record and still did not feel I was a player.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it
Well,
wasn't,
because playing in that kind of environment is a completely different discipline than being a good record producer.
yeah. It also involved, admitting to yourself that, that ABBA record wasn't all that bad.
Right,
You know,
right.
you had to throw. I ended up throwing away a lot of my preconceived, or norms or thoughts about certain types of music, and going back to the music that my dad liked, and the music that I heard on the radio as I grew up, and going, this is why I liked it, and this is why people learn to play together. And one of the things that I don't see a lot in electronic music are groups, and there are some. Don't get me wrong, groups of folks that play together. There's lots of us solo artists out there. But to do electronic music and to instinctively feed off of one another, knowing that you have a huge palette of sound available to every one of you, that allows you to pull, a full 10-fingered chord out of every one of you can do this while
Right.
holding on a sustain pedal and making this huge noise. But sometimes that's appropriate and sometimes it's not. But when do you get to that point in electronic music where it's fun to listen to, fun to make, and you are really in sync with the other guys around you, and you're all just on the same wavelength? It's
Right,
thinking
and
ahead to
there's
tails,
almost there's almost an ESP that between the players. Right.
and learning. This is that vocabulary. This is that thought processes that my father was so intent on making sure that I learned, and ultimately I did. But he was dead. If I have anything to say to him at this point, you were right. Damn it. And I would encourage, other people out there to get together and start playing. Take those electronics and use them with other types of instruments. Acoustic. Take the wraps off of your analog synths and get out there and play with bands. You'll learn to love the music. Your solo music will get better.
Right.
Everything will come once you reach that point. Now, that's not to say that people in their basements or home studios or whatever that work by themselves, and I can name a whole bunch of people. I have no disrespect for that. In fact, it's wonderful that there are people out there that make music by themselves, and the results are completely theirs, and they're good. It's good music.
Mm-hmm.
I think, though, in just about every one of those cases where I can say they've done it, they're great as solo artists and they can work great alone, I'll bet you that they at some point were in a band with somebody else for a long period of time, because it's very rare that you have to learn that thing, that vocabulary about music that help you get those thoughts out of your head and onto a keyboard, or into your sequencer even.
Right. If we talk about Dweller,
Yeah.
how did you guys operate as a band? Did you generally record together and do that kind of thing? Did you sit? I mean, there are pictures of you like sitting around in the same room and playing, but was that kind of the typical way that you did music making?
Well, to answer your question, how did we do all that? Poorly is my first reaction. But as a band, we had horrible relationship. I'm not going to deny that. it was terrible up until the time that John joined the band. There were moments of, I'm going to say they were good, but yeah, it just all in all, not one of my favorite experiences in my life. But it did teach you about being in a dysfunctional band.
Right.
But how we did things back then were we would typically each have the first album was made up of individual songs. Okay, I had material. Paul had material. I don't think Jeff really had anything at that particular time. There was something that him and Paul had worked on together. But what typically happened was somebody had an idea or some basic tracks, and the rest of the time was spent enhancing them, doing overdubs, whatever we needed to do to make them work. The first album was done with a combination of 8-track and Vision and an ESQ1 sequencer. Paul had an ESQ1 with a sequencer that was built in that he was actually extremely adept at using. The big song on there, No Boundary Condition, that was recorded live. All three of us listening to a set of backing tracks and playing to 8-track, and then doing live remixes with synced MIDI tracks to that. Mm-hmm. Very primitive, but very much a studio cat.
Studio exercise, yeah.
Yeah. The second album was digital audio editing had come into vogue. It was cheap enough for me to afford, and we started heading down that road where either Paul or I would get together and jam, Jeff a little bit, and then we would edit those performances down. And in the case of the second album, we took it one step further. I used a friend of mine. I hope he doesn't feel that way. We certainly didn't pay him very much. But I asked him, because there was so much infighting within the ranks, that I decided to bring in a third party and have them do the final editorial decisions. And he happened to have an ear that I respected quite a lot, and thus the second album was done, and it did well. All of the stuff. I mean, I don't think Dweller put out a dog album. They definitely changed from album to album to album. Sure. By the time the third album came around, and that's when Jeff decided that he was no longer, and I'm still really good friends with Jeff, by the way, so he just decided it wasn't for him, and so he decided to leave, and Paul had left for a while. I invited John in. Mm-hmm. And John and I started to do another album, and then Paul decided to come back. And it got to the point where, with John, and where I was happening at musically, that we started to create as a 3-piece. There was very little, nobody came with an idea. Nobody came with a song.
Right.
We ended up jamming, and then my chops as far as knowing how to crossfade and bring sections in and compose using the digital audio editor kind of came into being. And it worked really well. And that album, Ouroboros, was released and was on Mike's label. Not Mike Metley, Mike Griffin.
Right.
That's
the Hypnos label, right?
That's the Hypnos label, yeah. And that pretty much spelled the end of the band. Although John and I, did a show or two. I think we played Star's End, and we had another event in Europe, and which unfortunately John did not make it to. Someday I'll let him tell that story. It's all very amusing as we think about it now. At the time, I was petrified. My musical collaborator and friend did not show up at the pre-appointed time in The Hague.
That sounds like a story.
Yeah. But like I said, I'll let John explain it from his perspective.
Yeah, okay.
But I had brought in, I call them two ringers, Mr. Paul Vanuck and Giles Reeves. And I kind of, Giles and I talked about it, and we knew Paul would do just fine with anything we threw at him. But we were in a situation where we couldn't perform the album, the way it was intended,
Right.
So what I had to do was teach Giles the best I could all of John's parts.
Oh my.
And the ideas behind them. And then what I did was I concentrated on my parts, and then I also asked Giles to be musical director of the whole thing. Just kind of, hey, if we're going to have to make new pieces of music that we didn't know we were going to have to do, how are we going to do this? I have enough stuff getting the logistics of this gig down, and
Right.
Where we're staying and managing the event, and such. I asked him to take that on, and that was probably one of the nicest things he's ever done for me or for us, except mixing the last Motric album. He did that too. But I don't want to forget, he's just a great guy in general. But we pulled that off. It went well because of him, and eventually him and I ended up doing an album together because of how well we worked together, and we hope that we'll do another one. Neither of us is particularly fast. We all have other things that kind of take us away from what our love is,
Sure.
which is music. To like do things like eat and make money.
Well, when did that first album come out? That was like the late 2000s, right?
The
one you did with Giles.
Oh, that was 2007.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that was 2007, and I just put out my latest record on Hypnos. I don't know if you have a copy of that yet, Darwin. I've been really bad at promoting it, mainly because I expect the record label to do that.
Well, let's promote it right now. What's the name of it?
I forget.
Yeah, me too.
It's
Awesome.
not quite like that.
Boy, we need.
It's called. Hold on. I'm actually grabbing a copy right now.
All right.
It's called "Of Those Things Left Unsaid," and really, this is 8 tracks that have been. It has taken since my last solo album in 1999 to compile another solo album's worth of material. And again, it's because I'm horribly, I suffer from, I guess must be OCD or something, where I edit and I edit and I edit and I don't know when to quit. And it just takes me a while to get through it. And I told myself I was going to have this thing out 2 years ago, and it only came out about 2.5, 3 months ago. So I'm kind of behind schedule. Although I'm actively creating other new music, but this album probably it's different because of the amount of time it took to create. It's a little bit more concise and or feels like a complete concept. Especially, I'm going to call it the second song cycle. It was originally supposed to come out on vinyl and still will. I need to go talk to the guy that runs Jealous Butcher today. When I get done with this, I got to run by his house and pick something up. He doesn't live very far away. Say, hey, I'm ready to do this vinyl thing. It'll probably be a somewhat limited edition version of the same package with maybe an extra song thrown in for good measure on another side. Because I'm not sure how I'm going to divide it up. The song it's basically set to fit on 2 sides of an LP, but even then at 46 minutes, 47 minutes is a bit too long for an LP.
Right.
You start really you start losing some of your dynamics, and
Sure.
I wish to preserve that, so it might be something that's spread out over 4 sides of a 2.
Yeah,
Double
disc. Yeah.
So I'm going to be actually working on that and getting the artwork moved over. But for now, this is what is available. This CD, this primitive 44-1 stereo coaster that I'm certainly glad that people still like.
Yeah.
It's got music before the demise of Dweller. It's actually got a song that was going to either go, I think it was going to go on my last solo album, and it didn't make it because I felt it sounded too much like another one. I listen now and I go, what the heck was I thinking?
Right.
And another one that was probably going to go on one of the Dweller albums. And there's a bunch more material that when Paul left and before John joined, I was just making music. It was really kind of inspiring to go, okay, this ship is now mine.
Kind of a cathartic thing.
Yeah, and I will make it work. And it didn't work the way I expected, but it worked nonetheless. And some of that leftover material made it onto this album. And then I'm going to say the second side is stuff that I've been working on since 2004 till now.
Okay.
So it just takes. There's so much material that wasn't used that I could probably do another one of these.
Right.
And probably nobody will ever hear it, which is a good thing. But it's something that I will keep around and use for ideas, fodder for new compositions as I move forward. Because guess what? I'm 53, and I'm looking forward to the time when I can go back into my basement, my home studio, and just record by myself again. It's come full circle.
Yeah, it has. Speaking of coming full circle, one of the things I would say you are known for is having always been kind of a, and I don't know, maybe this isn't exactly true, but the perception of you is that you've always been a staunch analog advocate. Right?
Well, that's funny. I used to go to this bar called the Basement Pub, and there was another Dave that would go there, and he was known as Analog Dave, and I was known as Digital Dave. So
there you go.
Yeah, I would say that perception of me being an analog guy is not entirely correct, as was the impression that I was not a digital guy either. I used to take kind of offense, especially when Dave was there, because we got these great debates, because he was in typical Portland hipster fashion. He wanted to do everything analog,
right?
Everything.
Right.
Soup to nuts, analog console, analog mic,
analog tape, analog sounds, the whole bit,
everything,
yeah.
And the product will be on vinyl. And this was years ago. This is before vinyl took off again, but people in Portland were starting to collect it. Like it was coming back. He was the proto hipster. What he didn't understand, what people didn't when they heard this. Well, you're Digital Dave. I go, I've got one of the largest modular systems in Portland. What are you talking about? And it's all analog. And I build this analog stuff.
Right.
So I never quite got that. But yeah, to answer your question, or to make to speak to your point, yeah, I have lots of analog gear. I do have no love for the classics, and this is why. And believe me, I'm not saying that a Polymoog's a bad idea. I would love to have one. I just got tired of working on them. At some point, right, I had to make a decision. Either I'm going to play these instruments or I'm going to work on them. I do enjoy working on them. Don't get me wrong. I still do that. It just takes away from the time. So what ended up happening to replace that, that constant repair of, hey, how many VCS3s can I own that are breaking right now as I'm looking at it? I'm getting rid of those. I'm going to start building my own stuff that's stable, I can get parts for, and quite frankly is far more flexible than any of those other devices of that time. There's still things I really enjoy. I'm looking at an expander. I still have one of those, although there's now a new emulation for it. Maybe I'll like that better. I don't know.
Right.
when I
You,
play,
you aren't religious about these things, is what you're
no,
saying, right?
no. There's a set of Taurus threes right here next to my foot, and when I play with the krautrock band, and when I play with Dweller, the last time we played in Europe, I had my Voyager with me, so but right next to a Nord modular. You can live in both worlds. It's okay. If more people thought like this, there'd be a heck of a lot less fighting in the world.
So the modular stuff, are you saying most of the stuff you have is things that you built?
Well, I went
Or do you
after.
mix and match?
I mix and match,
I see.
but it started in earnest. I'm going to call it earnest with the ASM ones. I don't know if you
Oh,
remember
yes,
those.
I do. Absolutely.
And
Was that Gene Stop?
Gene Stop, yeah. I did 3 of those, and I had actually gotten to the point where I was thinking about manufacturing them. Most of that stuff was all electro notes.
Right.
It was very easy to customize, to make your own if you had to. I'm not going to say I'm the world's greatest designer. They do have certain ideas that may or may not be unique, but occasionally with the Electronote stuff, they kind of like give you a basic, hey, here's a great sawtooth core oscillator, and then this fine gentleman Paul Schreiber started doing the MOTM stuff. I kind of got rid of everything else. A divorce got rid of my large Doper system.
Mm-hmm.
But I stuck with the 5RU stuff and kept building Paul Schreiber's kits. Synth.com, everyone. Paul would offer, and not very many people knew about this, but you could buy prototyping kits. Down, front panel, mounting hardware, a proto board with the appropriate power connector, appropriate places to put pots on so you can mount them easily using the MOTM assembly conventions.
Right.
And you can design and build your own stuff on those.
Oh, interesting.
So I started doing both.
Right.
And then other people, this stuff started to take off before the Euro rack thing happened, which I think is both a blessing and a curse to the electronic music community. There were people selling boards, Jürgen Heibel for one, who was probably one of the best, most relatively unknown synthesizer designers in the world. And his designs were never clones. He wouldn't like open up a box and go, I will do this exact same thing on a new circuit board and everyone will have it. Ha 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 ha. No, what he would do is he goes, this is what they were doing and this is the effect they got. I'm going to do the same thing using my own design. And he would get stuff so spot on. In the case of like his trapezoid generator, I've got 4 of those basically. They're wonderful. They perfectly emulate a VCS3, the trapezoid generator in a VCS3. So my friend Jeffrey McEachin and I, about 3 years ago, started basically silk screening our own panels or having them done, cutting our own aluminum, and then either boards or circuits of our own design and or other people's printed circuit boards where all you had to do was just essentially get the bill of materials and get them all the parts and then stuff the boards and then modify if you need it or make it your own somehow. You'd end up with a nice 5RU panel that can be mounted up with the rest of your stuff that would interoperate with it. There's a number of people doing this in Portland, as a matter of fact, but unfortunately there isn't as much 5RU development as there is Eurorack stuff, which to me is mostly, if all you Euro lovers that are listening, all 6 of you, I'm not saying your stuff is shit with an E, but I'm going to say a lot of it is shit with an E. A lot of that stuff is out there. Nobody's decided on standardizing levels. It's all surface mount stuff that's just barely functional. The engineers not always the sharpest guys out there doing stuff. If you're gonna have that kind of crap in your racks like I do, do it yourself. Why pay somebody else, for their crap? Why give them the incentive to create really, really, really bad Eurorack modules? But on the other hand, there's a lot of that stuff out there.
Well, it's funny though. I mean, on one hand, I started off definitely with 5U stuff for my travel rig. I use a Eurorack setup, but I still have a fairly significant 5U setup. I think that in a way, starting off with the synth tech with the modem stuff, sort of like sets you up to be less happy with anything else. Because one of the things Paul is like anal retentive about things like level management and level standardization and the torque requirements for pots and stuff like that. He's just a nut job about that. And if you dare tell him that his idea might stand some modification, he will have a 45-minute rant to tell you exactly why he's right. And you know what? In the end, you're like, oh yeah, I guess you're right, man. He's just that guy.
Or after 45 minutes, he will have talked himself into
something else.
Because not always. Believe me, he's right more than he's ever been wrong. So, but I think I'm trying to remember at least one discussion we've had where he has reversed his position, but it's like once.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, but that kind of sets you up then for. When you get into stuff where you have tons of mixed manufacturers or, not necessarily the greatest quality control of just looking at that and being like, well, this doesn't even feel like it has any quality to it at all, So, well, my God.
There's lots of MOTM on the new album. Yeah.
Is there really? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, we have spent far more time than I expected. The time just blew away because, in fact, this was just you're a fun guy to talk to, and I had a great time just kind of skating around conceptually all over everything. I still would love to talk to you more about some of the other collaborations you've done. And one of the things I was going to try and nail you down on, we talked about it a bit by accident, is how you decide when your work is done. But I have a feeling that that's probably a longer discussion than we can have right now. So I think what I'm going to do is save that discussion for the next time we talk, because I'm going to want to have you on again. This is a lot of fun, and we opened a lot of interesting doors.
Cool. Well, thank you for having me. It's been enjoyable, and maybe I'll have you on my show sometime.
That'd be cool.
Talk to you later, darling.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. There you go, another chat recorded, chopped up, divvied up, and sent out to you, the listener. I hope that you enjoyed that as much as I did. Dave's just a fantastic guy. It seems like there's no end of discussions to be had. I'm looking forward to talking to him again in the hopefully near future. I want to thank again all the listeners for tuning in. It's been pretty fantastic. I'm not sure how you get hold of this podcast, but if you could do me a favor, if you get this through iTunes, if you could jump over to iTunes and just give me a really nice rating. First of all, that's a good pat on the head. But secondly, that makes the podcast more easily found for other people. And sure would like to make sure that interested parties get a chance to hear these interviews. I think they're fantastic. Wonderful insight into the way that creative people work. And I'd like to share this as much as possible. Other than that, I thank you for your continued support. Thanks again to Synthtopia, Create Digital Music, and all the other great sites that help spread the word about what we're doing. And next week I'm off to NAMM, so I'm not sure if podcast is going to get out. If so, it's going to be probably pretty low production quality because I'll be doing it from some ridiculous hotel room in Anaheim. But nevertheless, if you happen to be out in NAM, reach out to me either via email, which is ddg@cycling74, or you can hit me up on Facebook, where I am simply Darwin Gross, or Twitter, where I'm Darwin Gross, all one word. I hope I get a chance to see you. If not, you can always shoot me an email, just out of fun anyway. But thank you so much, and I'll catch you soon.